some memories refuse to stay buried, because the truth always finds a way to wear a familiar face. Snow drifted gently across the sidewalks of downtown Manhattan as the city glowed beneath thousands of holiday lights, their reflections shimmering against polished glass towers that stretched toward the winter sky. Luxury sedans lined the entrance of the Grand Lexington Hotel, where the Sterling Foundation was hosting its annual charity gala, an evening dedicated to supporting children who had lost their families far too soon. Inside the ballroom, applause echoed beneath crystal chandeliers as Nathan Sterling accepted another humanitarian award with the same composed smile he had worn for years. At 44, the white billionaire CEO had built one of the nation's most respected technology companies, donated hundreds of millions of dollars to children's charities, and appeared to possess everything the world admired. Yet beneath the perfectly tailored black tuxedo and confident expression lived a father whose heart had never recovered from one winter afternoon 12 years earlier when his 8-year-old son, Noah, was believed to have died in a devastating train accident. Since that day, Nathan had continued moving forward because life demanded it, but every December the grief quietly returned with the first snowfall. Around his neck, hidden beneath his crisp white shirt, rested a plain silver wedding band that had once belonged to his late wife Grace, the only reminder he allowed himself to carry each day. Noah's favorite possession had been different. It was a small silver necklace engraved with a tiny compass and the words, "Always find your way home." According to every official report, the necklace had been buried with his son. Nathan had watched the small wooden casket lowered into the frozen ground with his own eyes. That memory had never left him. As the gala concluded, Nathan quietly slipped away before reporters could ask for interviews. He preferred silence to celebration, especially on nights like this. The cold December air greeted him as he walked toward the waiting limousine parked across the street. Snowflakes settled lightly on his shoulders, while distant church bells echoed through the city. Then something unexpected drew his attention. Across the avenue, beside a neighborhood shelter where volunteers were distributing hot soup and blankets, a tall black homeless man wearing a weathered brown coat knelt beside an elderly veteran, gently breaking a loaf of bread into smaller pieces so others waiting nearby could share the meal. His movements were calm, patient, and almost unnoticed by the passing crowds. Nathan might have continued walking if a single glimmer of silver had not caught the glow of a nearby street lamp. The chain resting against the man's chest reflected the light for only a heartbeat, but it was enough. Nathan froze in place. His breathing slowed. The world around him seemed to disappear beneath the falling snow. Hanging from the man's neck was a small silver compass. The same scratches marked one edge of the pendant. The same tiny engraving curved beneath it. "Always find your way home." Nathan's pulse pounded against his ears as memories flooded back with painful clarity. He remembered fastening that necklace around Noah's neck on the boy's 8th birthday. He remembered Noah laughing as he promised never to lose it. He remembered holding the empty bedroom after the funeral, believing that little piece of silver had vanished forever. His driver opened the limousine door, but Nathan did not move. His eyes remained fixed on the stranger across the street. The homeless man smiled warmly as he handed the last piece of bread to a little girl before adjusting the familiar necklace with quiet care. Nathan crossed the busy avenue without noticing the cold or the traffic, stopping only a few feet away. His voice barely rose above a whisper, yet it carried the weight of 12 years of unanswered grief. "Where did you get that necklace?" The stranger slowly lifted his eyes, studying Nathan with calm curiosity instead of fear. Then, after a long silence, he gave an answer that would change both of their lives forever. "I've been waiting for someone to ask me that question." Snow continued drifting through the cold Manhattan night as passing headlights reflected across the wet pavement. But neither man seemed aware of the city moving around them. Nathan Sterling stood only a few feet away from the stranger, unable to pull his eyes from the familiar silver compass resting against the worn brown coat. 12 years of carefully controlled grief had suddenly become something raw and impossible to contain. His voice remained steady only because years of leading boardrooms had taught him how to hide emotion even when his world was collapsing beneath him. "That necklace belonged to my son," he said quietly. "It was buried with him." The homeless man looked down at the pendant before gently lifting it into the palm of his hand. The metal had aged with time, and tiny scratches covered its surface exactly where Noah had once dropped it while playing in his backyard. The stranger did not appear frightened by Nathan's words. Instead, his expression softened with quiet understanding. "I was told someone would come looking for this one day," he replied. Nathan stared at him, searching for any sign of deception, but found only calm sincerity. Years of negotiating billion-dollar contract had taught him to recognize rehearsed lies. Yet this man's eyes carried none of the hesitation he expected. Around them, volunteers continued serving hot soup to families gathered outside the shelter, while children laughed over cups of steaming cocoa. The stranger carefully stepped aside to allow an elderly woman carrying a blanket to pass before returning his attention to Nathan. "My name is Elijah Brooks," he said. "And before you ask, no, I did not steal this necklace." Nathan took a slow breath. "Then tell me how it came into your hands." Elijah looked toward the softly falling snow as though searching through memories scattered across the years. "About 12 years ago, I was living under an abandoned rail bridge outside Albany. One night, there was a terrible storm. Heavy rain, freezing wind, and sirens everywhere. I found a young boy sitting alone near the tracks." Nathan felt his heartbeat quicken. Elijah continued slowly, choosing each word with care. He was cold, confused, and barely speaking. He held this necklace so tightly that his hands would not let go. Every time I asked his name, he whispered only one word: "Home." Nathan's chest tightened. He remembered Noah repeating that same word whenever thunderstorms frightened him as a child. Elijah lowered his eyes. "I stayed with him until help arrived. Before the ambulance reached us, a woman came running through the rain. She seemed to know exactly who he was. She thanked me, wrapped him in her coat, and promised he would be safe." Nathan interrupted quietly. "Who was she?" Elijah shook his head. "I never learned her name. Everything happened so fast." She noticed the necklace slipping from the boy's neck after the chain broke. She placed it in my hand and said, "Keep this until the right person comes asking. One day the truth will need it." Nathan stood speechless. Every official report stated that emergency responders had reached the accident scene immediately. None mentioned an unknown woman or a surviving child. None mentioned a broken necklace. Snow settled silently across Elijah's shoulders as he added, "I tried to find them afterward, but they were gone. I carried the necklace because I made a promise. I believed whoever came searching would need answers more than I ever could." Nathan slowly reached toward the pendant, but stopped before touching it. The familiar engraving caught the glow of a nearby street lamp. "Always find your way home." His eyes filled with memories he had spent 12 years trying to bury. Then something else caught his attention. Folded carefully inside the chain was a tiny weathered piece of paper he had never noticed before. Elijah looked equally surprised. "That was never there before," he whispered. Nathan carefully unfolded the fragile note with trembling hands. Only one sentence remained legible beneath faded ink. "Do not trust the accident report." The tiny piece of paper trembled between Nathan Sterling's fingers as snowflakes melted against the faded ink, threatening to erase the only new clue he had discovered in 12 years. He carefully folded it again and slipped it into the inside pocket of his overcoat, as though protecting something far more valuable than paper. Around them, the evening continued as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Volunteers collected empty soup containers, children waved goodbye to one another, and the city carried on beneath glowing holiday lights. Yet for Nathan, time had quietly divided itself into two parts. Everything he had believed before this moment, and everything he no longer knew. Elijah Brooks watched him with calm patience. "I can tell that note means something," he said softly. Nathan nodded without looking away from the silver compass. "It means someone wanted the truth hidden." The words lingered between them. For years Nathan had accepted the official investigation because grief had left him with no strength to question it. Every document had seemed complete. Every witness statement had sounded convincing. Every expert had assured him there were no survivors. Now one sentence had shattered the certainty he had spent more than a decade trying to build. Nathan reached into his wallet and removed a business card. "Please come with me," he said. "I can arrange a hotel room, clean clothes, medical care, anything you need." Elijah smiled politely before shaking his head. "I appreciate your kindness, but I made a promise to stay where I could be found. If the person who trusted me ever returned, I wanted them to know where to look." Nathan lowered the card without offense. The answer only strengthened his belief that Elijah had been carrying a responsibility instead of a possession. "Then at least let me drive you somewhere warm." Elijah glanced toward the shelter where volunteers were folding tables and stacking empty boxes. "These people are my neighbors," he replied. "I leave after everyone else has a place to sleep." Nathan followed his gaze and noticed something he had overlooked before. Elijah was helping distribute blankets long after receiving one for himself. He quietly handed his own winter gloves to an elderly man whose hands shook from the cold. He spoke gently with every person who approached him, remembering names and asking about family members with genuine concern. Wealth had taught Nathan how to recognize leadership inside boardrooms. Tonight, he recognized the same quality standing on a snowy sidewalk. Before either man spoke again, Nathan's phone vibrated. His longtime chief of security, Michael Turner, answered immediately when Nathan called. "Michael," Nathan said quietly, "I need every archived record from Noah's accident. Police reports, medical files, emergency dispatch logs, surveillance footage, newspaper photographs, everything. Do not notify anyone outside our legal team. I want complete discretion." Michael paused for only a second. "You have never reopened that file before." Nathan looked once more at the compass necklace. "I know, but tonight I learned something impossible." After ending the call, he turned back toward Elijah. "Would you tell me everything you remember about that night? Even the smallest detail could matter." Elijah closed his eyes briefly as though searching through memories buried beneath countless winters. "I remember the rain. I remember hearing a child crying before I ever saw him. I remember that the woman who found us seemed frightened, not of the storm, but of someone else. Before she left, she looked behind her several times as if she expected another car to arrive." Nathan listened without interrupting. "Did she say anything else?" Elijah nodded slowly. "Only one sentence. She looked at the boy, then at me, and whispered, 'If they discover he survived, they will never stop looking.'" Nathan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the snow. Somewhere inside the official version of the tragedy, there was still a missing chapter, and for the first time in 12 years, he believed his son's story might not have ended beside those railroad tracks after all. The following morning, the first pale light of dawn stretched across the Manhattan skyline, casting long reflections over the glass walls of Sterling Global Headquarters as Nathan Sterling stepped into his private office, carrying a single weathered note and a silver compass necklace that had already rewritten everything he believed about his past. The executive floor remained unusually quiet, its polished marble hallways echoing only with distant footsteps as employees prepared for another business day. Nathan closed the office door behind him and carefully placed the necklace on his desk beside a framed photograph of Grace and 8-year-old Noah smiling during a summer vacation on the coast of Maine. For years, he had looked at that photograph every morning without allowing himself to ask any new questions. Today, he found himself studying every detail as though the answers had been hidden inside the picture all along. Within minutes, Michael Turner entered carrying 3 archival storage boxes covered with security seals that had not been broken since the investigation ended 12 years earlier. "Everything we recovered from our private records is here," Michael said quietly. "Insurance files, newspaper clippings, independent investigators, emergency dispatch transcripts, and copies of the official police report." Nathan nodded and began opening the boxes one document at a time. Dust rose gently from folders untouched for more than a decade. Every page reminded him of the darkest season of his life. Hours passed as sunlight climbed across the office floor. Most reports repeated the same conclusion, that Noah had not survived the train accident. Yet Nathan noticed something he had never questioned before. The timeline shifted by nearly 23 minutes between the emergency dispatcher log and the official incident summary. Another file listed one responding ambulance, while a maintenance report mentioned 2 emergency vehicles arriving at the scene. None of those differences had seemed important while grief consumed every thought. Now they appeared impossible to ignore. Michael leaned closer over one document. There is something else. Nathan followed his finger to the bottom of a faded witness statement. A name had been crossed out so heavily it was almost invisible, but modern document scanning software revealed faint letters beneath the black ink. Eleanor Hayes. Nathan searched his memory without success. Who was she? Michael immediately searched the archived database. Within moments, a photograph appeared on the large office monitor. An emergency room nurse employed at St. Matthew Medical Center 12 years earlier. Employment ended only 6 months after Noah's accident. No public explanation. No forwarding address. Nathan remained silent while another memory quietly surfaced. Grace had once mentioned meeting a compassionate nurse named Eleanor during Noah's recovery from a broken arm years before the accident. He had forgotten the conversation completely until this moment. Michael continued searching through digital records before stopping once again. Nathan, this is unusual. He enlarged another document recovered from an old maintenance archive. Security footage from the train station had officially been listed as destroyed due to storm damage. Yet an internal maintenance request filed 2 days after the accident stated that all surveillance equipment had remained fully operational throughout the entire evening. Nathan slowly stood from his chair and walked toward the panoramic windows overlooking the city. Snow still covered rooftops below, while thousands of people hurried through ordinary mornings, completely unaware that one forgotten file might change an entire family's history. He pressed one hand against the cool glass, thinking of Elijah waiting faithfully all those years with nothing more than a promise and a necklace. Wealth had given Nathan access to investigators, attorneys, and private aircraft, yet the first honest clue had come from a man who possessed almost nothing except integrity. Turning back toward his desk, Nathan picked up the silver compass once more. Light from the rising sun reflected across its worn surface, revealing something neither he nor Elijah had noticed the night before. Inside the tiny compass casing, barely visible beneath years of scratches, were 3 engraved letters so small they could only be read in direct sunlight. S. M. H. Nathan whispered them aloud before looking toward Michael. St. Matthew Hospital. The room fell, completely silent, as both men realized the necklace had been carrying another hidden message all along. By early afternoon, Nathan, Sterling, and Michael Turner stood inside the quiet archives of St. Matthew Hospital, a place where decades of forgotten records rested behind steel shelves and carefully labeled storage boxes. The building itself had been renovated several times over the years, but the basement archive remained almost untouched, carrying the faint scent of old paper and polished wood. A retired records supervisor named Margaret Ellis greeted them with kind curiosity after receiving Nathan's request for access. She had worked at the hospital for more than 35 years and remembered names that had long disappeared from digital databases. When Nathan quietly placed the silver compass necklace on the table, Margaret's expression changed immediately. She reached toward it with trembling fingers but stopped just short of touching it. "I've seen this before," she whispered. Nathan felt his pulse quicken. When Margaret closed her eyes for a moment, searching through memories that had rested undisturbed for years. The night of the railroad accident. A young nurse brought in a little boy suffering from exposure and memory loss. He refused to let go of that necklace. Nathan exchanged a stunned glance with Michael before leaning forward. His name was Noah Sterling. Margaret slowly shook her head. "He never told us his name. Every time we asked, he simply repeated one sentence. I have to find my dad." Nathan lowered his head as emotion quietly settled over him. He remembered teaching Noah those exact words whenever they became separated in crowded places. Margaret continued, speaking with gentle care. The nurse who admitted him was Eleanor Hayes. She believed someone might be looking for the child, but strange things began happening before she could complete the paperwork. Two men arrived asking unusual questions about unidentified patients admitted after the accident. Eleanor became frightened. She requested permission to move the boy under temporary protective status until his identity could be confirmed. Michael quickly opened his notebook. Who authorized that decision? Margaret sighed softly. Hospital policy allowed emergency protection for unidentified children whenever there were concerns about their immediate safety. Eleanor believed someone was trying to reach the child before his family could. Nathan listened without interrupting, allowing every detail to settle into place. What happened next? Margaret walked toward an old filing cabinet labeled Temporary Protective Records. After several minutes, she carefully removed a thin folder wrapped in faded brown paper. The front page carried a temporary patient number instead of a name. Inside rested handwritten nursing notes describing an 8-year-old boy suffering from confusion, mild injuries, and complete memory loss regarding his identity. One note caught Nathan's attention immediately. Patient repeatedly responds to lullaby played by female visitor. Nathan felt tears gathering as memories of Grace softly singing Noah to sleep returned with perfect clarity. Margaret turned another page. 3 days later, Eleanor requested emergency placement through a confidential child protection program because she believed releasing the boy publicly could place him in danger until his identity was confirmed. Nathan frowned. Then why was no family ever contacted? Margaret hesitated before answering. Because according to these records, someone officially informed the hospital that every child involved in the accident had already been identified and all surviving relatives had been notified. Eleanor questioned that statement, but before she could challenge it, her resignation appeared in the system. Michael quietly examined the final page inside the folder. This signature does not belong to Eleanor. Margaret looked closely and slowly nodded. You are right. She always signed her full name. This is only initials. Silence filled the archive room as Nathan carefully closed the folder. Every answer uncovered another question. Yet one truth had become impossible to deny. Noah had survived long enough to reach the hospital. Someone had hidden that fact. As they prepared to leave, Margaret opened one final drawer beneath the cabinet and removed a sealed envelope covered in dust. Written across the front, in Eleanor Hayes' handwriting, were 6 simple words that made Nathan stop breathing for a moment. For Noah's father, if he returns. The sealed envelope rested in Nathan Sterling's hands with surprising weight, as though 12 years of unanswered questions had somehow found their way into a single sheet of folded paper. The archive room remained completely silent except for the soft hum of the ventilation system and the distant ticking of an old wall clock that seemed to measure every passing second with unusual importance. Nathan carefully broke the aging seal, taking extraordinary care not to damage the fragile paper inside. Eleanor Hayes' handwriting flowed neatly across the page, elegant yet hurried, as if every sentence had been written against time itself. If you are reading this, the letter began, then I hope the truth has finally found its way to you. I could not remain silent, even if history chose not to believe me. Nathan's breathing slowed as he continued reading. Eleanor explained that the little boy admitted to St. Matthew Hospital had survived the accident with only minor physical injuries, but severe memory loss. During his first days at the hospital, he remembered almost nothing except a silver necklace, his father's first name, and a lullaby his mother used to sing before bedtime. Eleanor became convinced that someone was attempting to interfere with the child's identification after 2 well-dressed men repeatedly appeared at the hospital asking unusual questions while refusing to identify themselves. Their interest frightened her because they seemed more concerned with locating the child than confirming his safety. Rather than following ordinary procedures, Eleanor quietly contacted a trusted friend working with a confidential child protection organization. Believing the boy remained in danger until his identity could be verified independently, she arranged for him to enter protective care under temporary guardianship. Before she could contact Nathan directly, unexpected events changed everything. Eleanor wrote that she was dismissed after refusing to sign revised hospital records she believed contained false information. She feared that every official communication connected to the accident had been compromised, leaving her with no safe way to reach Noah's family. Her final sentence struck Nathan more deeply than every page before it. I prayed every year that a father who never stopped loving his son would one day find this letter. Nathan slowly lowered the page while tears quietly gathered in his eyes. He had spent years believing grief meant letting go, yet somewhere another person had carried the burden of protecting his son's story without ever meeting him. Margaret gently placed one comforting hand upon his shoulder. "Eleanor was one of the finest nurses I ever knew," she said softly. "She would never have abandoned that child unless she believed it was the only way to keep him safe." Nathan nodded with quiet gratitude before carefully folding the letter and placing it beside the silver compass. Michael looked toward another document inside the envelope. "There is something else." Nathan unfolded a smaller sheet containing only one address, a date from 12 years earlier, and the name of the confidential organization that had received the unidentified boy. Beneath the information, Eleanor had written one final note. "If he survived with his memories lost, do not expect him to remember who he was. Help him discover who he has become." Those words lingered in Nathan's heart long after he finished reading. He realized that if Noah truly lived somewhere beyond the life they had lost, he was no longer searching for an 8-year-old child frozen in memory. He was searching for a grown man who had built an entirely different life. As Nathan carefully placed the letter back inside its envelope, he quietly looked toward Michael. "We are not going there to reclaim someone," he said. "We are going there to meet him, if he is willing." Across the city, unaware that an extraordinary journey was leading toward him, a young man paused outside a neighborhood music school after finishing a volunteer lesson for children. Around his neck, hidden beneath a simple sweater, rested an identical silver compass that he had worn for as long as he could remember, never knowing why it had always felt like home. 2 mornings later, the winter sun rose gently over a quiet New England town where maple trees lined peaceful streets and children hurried toward school carrying musical instrument cases instead of briefcases. Nathan Sterling stepped out of a black sedan with Michael Turner beside him, both men standing across the street from a modest brick building whose sign simply read Harmony Community Music Center. Laughter floated through the open doorway as piano notes blended with the cheerful voices of children practicing for a holiday concert. Nathan remained motionless for a long moment. For 12 years, he had imagined every possible version of finding his son again, yet none of those dreams had prepared him for the ordinary beauty unfolding before him. Through the front window, he saw a young man in his early 20s sitting at an upright piano while patiently guiding a little girl through the final notes of a Christmas melody. The young man's posture was calm, his smile effortless, and his kindness unmistakable. Around his neck, barely visible above the collar of his gray sweater, rested the second silver compass. Nathan's hands trembled almost imperceptibly. The familiar way the young man tilted his head while listening to the music reminded him so vividly of Grace that he had to steady himself against the cold metal railing beside the sidewalk. Michael quietly whispered, "His adoption records identify him as Benjamin Hayes." Nathan nodded slowly, unable to speak. He understood now that the boy Eleanor had protected had grown into a man with an entirely different name, an entirely different life, and people who undoubtedly loved him. Bursting through the door with emotional declarations would honor no one. The lesson from Eleanor's letter echoed inside his heart. Meet him, do not reclaim him. As the music lesson ended, children surrounded Benjamin with handmade holiday cards and grateful hugs before racing outside toward waiting parents. Nathan watched the gentle ease with which Benjamin greeted every family, remembering names, encouraging shy students, and helping one elderly grandmother carry a heavy bag to her car before returning inside with quiet humility. Wealth had introduced Nathan to influential leaders across the world, yet very few possessed the natural compassion standing only yards away. Finally, the building grew quiet. Nathan entered slowly, removing his gloves as warm air, carrying the scent of pine decorations and fresh coffee, welcomed him inside. Benjamin looked up from arranging sheet music and offered the friendly smile. He gave every visitor, "Good morning. Can I help you?" Nathan opened his mouth, but no words came. Instead, he found himself looking at the silver compass resting against Benjamin's sweater. Benjamin noticed the older man's attention and gently touched the pendant. "Beautiful necklace, isn't it?" he said. "I have worn it for as long as I can remember. My adoptive mother always told me it belonged to my first family, even though nobody knew who they were." Nathan reached into his coat pocket with careful hands and slowly revealed the matching compass Elijah had carried for 12 years. Benjamin's smile faded into quiet astonishment. He instinctively stepped closer, studying every scratch along the worn silver surface. "That is impossible," he whispered. Nathan's voice was barely stronger than the winter breeze outside. "I believe these necklaces once belonged together." Benjamin looked from one pendant to the other, then back into Nathan's eyes. For reasons he could not explain, something deep within him stirred. A forgotten melody, a distant memory, a comforting voice calling his name from somewhere beyond time. He quietly placed one hand against his temple as tears unexpectedly filled his eyes. I do not understand why," he whispered, "but looking at you feels strangely familiar." Nathan's own eyes glistened as he fought to remain composed. He took one slow step forward, not close enough to invade the young man's space, only close enough to offer truth without pressure. "You do not have to remember anything today," he said gently. "I only came because I never stopped hoping you were alive." The room fell into peaceful silence as sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating both silver compasses until they reflected the same warm light for the first time in more than 12 years. The winter afternoon settled quietly over the little town as soft sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the music center, wrapping the room in a peaceful glow that contrasted sharply with the storm of emotions neither Nathan, Sterling, nor Benjamin Hayes could fully explain. For several long moments, neither man spoke. The matching silver compasses rested side by side upon the piano, their worn surfaces reflecting the same beam of light as though time itself had patiently waited for this meeting. Benjamin slowly reached toward his own necklace, then looked at Nathan with eyes filled not with certainty, but with questions. "My adoptive mother always told me that if my past ever returned, I should never fear it," he said quietly. "She believed truth was never the enemy." Nathan nodded with gentle understanding. She was a wise woman. Benjamin walked toward a nearby bookshelf and carefully removed a framed photograph. It showed a smiling couple standing beside a teenage boy holding his first guitar. "These are my parents," he said with quiet pride. "They adopted me when I was 9 years old. They never tried to replace my past. They simply gave me a future." Nathan studied the photograph with sincere gratitude rather than jealousy. The couple's warmth was unmistakable, and for the first time he understood that whoever had raised Benjamin had done so with extraordinary love. "I owe them more than I can ever repay," Nathan said softly. Benjamin looked surprised. Most people would not say that. Nathan smiled faintly. "A father who truly loves his child is grateful to anyone who protected him when he could not." Those words settled deeply inside Benjamin's heart. They did not sound like the desperate claims of someone seeking to rewrite another person's life. They sounded like quiet respect. Just then the front door opened, and an elderly woman carrying a violin case stepped inside. Her silver hair framed a kind face that immediately brightened when she saw Benjamin. "I almost forgot your lesson schedule," she laughed before noticing the unfamiliar visitors. Benjamin warmly introduced her. "This is my mother, Sarah Hayes." Nathan instinctively stood. Sarah greeted him politely, but the moment her eyes fell upon the silver compass resting beside the piano, her expression changed completely. She slowly covered her mouth with one trembling hand. "You found him," she whispered before tears filled her eyes. Benjamin looked from Sarah to Nathan in astonishment. You knew? Sarah gently nodded. Your father and I promised Eleanor that. If anyone ever came carrying the matching compass and treated you with kindness instead of demands, we would finally tell you everything. She carefully sat beside Benjamin and took his hand. When you came into our lives, you had no memories except a lullaby and a little silver necklace. Eleanor believed your family loved you deeply, but feared someone powerful had hidden the truth. She begged us to give you a peaceful childhood until the day your real story found its way home. Benjamin's eyes filled with emotion as years of unanswered questions slowly found their place. Nathan quietly removed a small leather wallet from his coat and unfolded a faded photograph he had carried every day since Noah disappeared. It showed Grace sitting on a park bench with 8-year-old Noah laughing while holding a bright red kite. Benjamin accepted the photograph with careful hands. He stared at it for several silent seconds before his fingers began trembling. Without warning, a forgotten melody drifted into his mind. He could almost hear a woman's gentle voice singing the same lullaby that had followed him through dreams for years. Tears slipped down his face as he looked back at Nathan. I do not remember everything, he whispered, but I remember feeling safe when I heard that song. Nathan stepped forward slowly, giving Benjamin every opportunity to step away if he wished. Instead, Benjamin closed the remaining distance himself. The two men embraced quietly in the middle of the music room, not because every answer had been found, but because hope had finally become stronger than loss. Through the front window, snow continued falling across the peaceful street, while, many miles away, Elijah Brooks looked toward the evening sky with a gentle smile, somehow sensing that the promise he had carried for 12 long years had finally reached the family that never stopped believing. 1 year later, the first morning of spring arrived beneath a brilliant blue sky as sunlight spilled across the glass entrance of the newly opened Eleanor Hayes Family Hope Center, a place dedicated to helping missing children reconnect with their families and providing support for foster parents, adoptive families, and children searching for their own stories. The building stood not as a monument to wealth, but as a quiet promise that no child should ever lose hope of finding home again. Nathan Sterling watched guests gather beneath rows of flowering trees while children laughed in the courtyard, their voices replacing memories that had once been filled only with silence and grief. Standing beside him was Benjamin Hayes, who now understood that he had once been Noah Sterling, yet had chosen to honor both chapters of his life by keeping the name of the family who had lovingly raised him. Nathan had never asked him to give up the life he had built. Instead, they had spent the past year discovering each other one conversation, one shared meal, and one quiet memory at a time. Their relationship had grown not from obligation, but from mutual respect and patient love. Sarah Hayes stood nearby, with tears of joy shining in her eyes as she embraced Nathan warmly. The two parents who had loved the same child at different seasons of his life had become close friends, united not by loss, but by gratitude. Elijah Brooks arrived a few moments later wearing a clean navy jacket and carrying the same gentle smile Nathan had first seen outside the shelter months earlier. No longer without a home, Elijah had accepted Nathan's invitation to become the center's community outreach director, helping families in crisis and ensuring that those living on the streets were treated with dignity and compassion. When Nathan greeted him with a heartfelt embrace, photographers quietly lowered their cameras, realizing the moment mattered far more than any headline they could capture. Inside the center's entrance hall, a simple display case held the two silver compass necklaces side by side beneath a small plaque engraved with a single sentence. Always find your way home. Visitors paused before the display, not because of its material value, but because it represented the extraordinary journey of truth, perseverance, and hope that had reunited a family after 12 long years. During the dedication ceremony, Nathan stepped to the podium and looked across the crowd before speaking. For many years, I believed success meant protecting what I had built. Then I learned that the greatest success is helping others find what they thought they had lost. This center exists because ordinary people chose courage over comfort, kindness over fear, and truth over silence. He turned toward Elijah with deep appreciation. A man the world overlooked carried hope when I no longer could. He smiled at Sarah. A mother opened her heart to a child who needed one. Finally, he looked toward Benjamin. And my son taught me that love does not begin again after loss. It quietly waits until two hearts are ready to recognize each other. The audience rose in warm applause as sunlight filled the room. After the ceremony, Benjamin walked with Nathan into the peaceful memorial garden where a bronze bench overlooked a small reflecting pond surrounded by white roses, Grace's favorite flower. They placed fresh blossoms beside a simple stone engraved with her name. Benjamin softly hummed the lullaby that had survived even when every other memory had faded. Nathan quietly joined him, their voices blending beneath the gentle spring breeze. As the final notes drifted across the garden, Nathan rested one hand on his son's shoulder, and Benjamin returned the gesture with a warm embrace that needed no words. Above them, two silver compasses caught the afternoon sunlight, shining with quiet brilliance as though they had finally completed the journey they were always meant to make, reminding everyone who passed that the strongest families are not defined by perfect beginnings, but by hearts that never stop searching for one another. Because sometimes the greatest miracle is not finding the truth, but discovering that love patiently waited for you every step of the way.